All right, Unit 9, less than 35, is going to be on matrices. In this section, we're going to go through some of the basics and then how to add and subtract. So we'll be setting up matrices and then do some of the basic arithmetic with it. All right, so first of all, matrices are just a grouping of numbers that have something in common. So, for instance, if we have basketball players here, three of them, and how many points they've scored and how many rebounds they have, it's just a nice way to organize some of these things together. These are people who are lending or borrowing, excuse me, money from a lender. And again, you can write it in chart form. When we go to use it, writing it here in matrix form, whether we're going to put that into a calculator or do stuff by hand, it kind of depends on what you're being asked to do. It's just a slightly different way of writing it. Notice how these things basically look the same. This is just, again, um, a slightly different grouping type of thing for using it. And this is what it would look like if we were going to put it in the calculator. So one of the main things that you need to know with a matrix is how big it is, which is called the dimensions. Dimensions are done by rows and columns. So you always list the number of rows first, and rows go across like rows in a movie theater. And then columns go second, and that would be up and down like columns on a building. So for instance, this matrix here, notice that they're the same, they just have the different colors on it. There would be 1, 2, 3 rows going across, and there would be 1, 2, 3, 4 columns going down. So that's why the dimensions of this particular matrix are 3 by 4, and that's how we write it. We write the number of rows first, then put what looks like a multiplication sign. We say that's by, and then the number of columns goes second. You're going to need to know dimensions to make sure that things match for when we're doing, especially multiplying in the next section, and when you go to put things in the calculator as well. We're not going to really do any calculator stuff here in this section. We're going to do it more in the next section. Okay, so in order to add and subtract matrices together, they have to be the exact same size. So for instance, this is a 2 by 3 matrix. This is a 2 by 3 matrix. Notice that they're the same size. This one is 1, 2, 3 by 2. So you could add A and B together. You could add B and A together, but you couldn't add either one of those to C because they are not the same. Now, some people say, well, can't you just turn this on its side and whatever? And it kind of depends. Typically, when you see matrices lined up and they are not the exact same size and direction and all of that, you're not going to be able to add or subtract those. Okay, so taking those two matrices, let's actually do the adding and subtracting. So adding is literally just taking each piece and adding them together. So for instance, the first piece in the upper left to the first piece in the upper left, and you would add those together. So 0 plus 4 obviously is 4. Then I would do the same thing with those two numbers, and 3 plus 1 is 4. And then I would do the same thing with those two numbers. So when they line up, the numbers that line up is what you're going to add and subtract. So 1 plus negative 2 or 1 minus 2 is negative 1. 2 plus 3 is 5. 6 plus negative 2 or 6 minus 2 is 4. Okay, and then this would obviously be 0 plus 4 is just 4. The matrix that you started off with, which is a 2 by 3 and a 2 by 3, the size of the answer is also a 2 by 3. So when we do all four of these here, you're going to end up with 2 by 3 answers. Okay, A minus B. I'm going to erase these things here just so we can have it a little clearer. Okay, so now this time we're going to subtract the numbers. So 0 minus 4, negative 4. 3 minus 1 is 2. Negative 5 minus 0, negative 5. 1 minus negative 2, so 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 minus 3, negative 1. 6 minus negative 2, so 6 plus 2 is 8. And that's all there is to it. All right, 3 times A. So take each one of these numbers and multiply by 3. 3 times 0, 3 times 3, times negative 5, times 1, times 2, times 6. And then to combine those ideas together, Now, if you can do this in your head, that's great. Otherwise, you would have to write what 2a is. So I'm going to multiply each one of those numbers by 2. And then what each one of the numbers times 3 is for b. And then, in this case, subtract those two. And then that would be your final answer. Now, if you can do all of that in your head, that's great. I would highly recommend writing that in 2 steps so that you don't screw that up. Okay, then the last piece on this is that the dimensions need to match like they did here, but labels need to match as well. So just putting a bunch of numbers, like we did right here is all fine and good, but what the heck do these numbers mean? So if I put some sort of label along with it, and I know this is just A, B, C, D, and E, but back to our, players and rebounds type of thing, then it makes a little more sense when you're doing that. So I know that these 3 players, their totals in these 2 games would be this number of points and this number of rebounds. We could average those things. There's lots of things that you'd be able to do with those. So when you go to set up something like this one, you got to make sure that the pieces line up correctly. So Joe and Jim are buying pizza and pop for parties. They want to compare 2 different restaurants. Joe is going to buy 10 pizzas and 30 cans of pop from the first restaurant and 8 and 40 from the second. All right, so let's start with... All right, so we've got Joe, and then we're going to have Jim. I'm going to call this one up here just as a label for the whole thing. Restaurant number 1, restaurant number 2. Okay, so he is buying pizza and pop. All right, so Joe buys 10 pizzas and 30 cans of pop. Jim from the first one buys 12 pizzas and 20 cans of pop. Okay, from restaurant number 2, sorry if you say soda, but well, it's pop. All right, so from restaurant number 2, Joe buys 8 and 40. Jim buys 11 and 35. So then their total Joe, Jim, sorry, that's bad. Pizza, pop. So 10 plus 8, 18. 30 and 40 is 70. 12 and 11 is 23. 20 and 35 is 55. Now, I know this seemed like a lot of work you could have done that idea in your head. But again, we're just organizing this to be able to do possibly other things with it. When you see multiplication in the next lesson, you'll see that doing something like this is significantly more useful. So the adding part is just kind of some preliminary work that you're going to do on a lot of problems to then take it extra steps. All right, so that is the matrix basics and adding and subtracting. Lesson 35. Let me know if you got any questions.